maintenance of the levee system along the Gulf Coast area because money had to go to that war, and in doing so, unfortunately, the levees weren't maintained. And the levee system in New Orleans, just to give you an idea, a levee was kind of a metal. It's just a metal sheet that they stick into the ground. It goes about 15 feet into the ground, and then they put a mound of like just dirt over it. So that's what it was. And essentially, as the water pounded away, it pounded away all the dirt, and the levee just kind of toppled over. So the water came from not the Mississippi River, but actually Lake Pontchartrain, which the city of New Orleans is kind of straddling both. And so that's why you had all the damage and the flooding, because the city is below sea level. The water just sat there for about 2 weeks. Yeah. So I wanted to give you an idea of some of what happened. If you can see, can you guys see this pretty good? Yeah. Right here is on this house. I know this one kind of looks like it's not damaged, but this one does. But actually, it was, water got into all the first floor here. You see an X, and there are actually numbers here. The Coast Guard had to go into every single house. This is actually the neighborhood that I've grown up in. They had to go into every single house and check to see. They was indicating here if there were any bodies, if there were any animals, if structural damage, and that they had cleared checking it. So that's what the X on the house for. And unfortunately, there are still some houses in New Orleans that have those symbols on it because they haven't done much to fix it. Now, who's the tallest person here in the class? Yeah. Come here, let me. You gotta help me do a video.
I'm second tallest.
No, you're not. And that's very important to me. How tall are you? So turn around. I want to give you an idea of how much water was in some people's homes. He's 6'2". The water that was, this is the kitchen in my parents' house. The water that went into there would go to his glasses.
Oh,
so, and the house, the neighborhood that I showed you before that, the house that I grew up in, the water actually went over the top of it. So you have to, you can imagine how much that was. And so that if you see actually the water line, thank you. Right here. So this is all damage, and the water, like I said, sat there for a couple weeks.
wow.
So this is mold and damage to the whole kitchen area. Everything that was above the 6 feet line was kind of okay, but I mean, sheetrock and everything had to be pulled out. The roof had to be replaced. Some people's houses just had to be pulled out.
What does your parents want to have?
Actually, after Katrina, my father passed away, and my mom still, they rebuilt the house and she lived there. She's actually in there now with no electricity because of Isaac, by herself, with my brother.
Oh.
This is just some of the pictures that I said. People used a lot of plywood to try and board up things because if they could get into their homes once the water receded, they just basically were trying to gather what they could. Most of the stuff, if you think about it, you think, well, maybe it's not going to be that bad, but you evacuate, so you might take your important documents, and a lot of people, that's all they took, if that. They took, I know people who took maybe 3 pairs of underclothes and 2 shirts and a pair of jeans. And everything else that they owned was gone. Think about every baby picture that you ever had, every trace that you existed, your birth certificate, gone. All your clothes are gone, all your music is gone, your computers. Yes, sir.
Those Xboxes back then.
Yeah.
So they lost the Xbox.
Yeah.
Not funny, man. I love my Xbox. I cried mine.
I'm glad that's the most important thing to you. But
What about family?
right. I mean, essentially, what you had also was there were some people who decided to stay for Katrina because it always seemed to happen that hurricanes would change course right before they would hit New Orleans. So it would always change course. So nobody really expected anything to be that bad, although there have been warnings for years. And actually, Katrina did change course, but like I said, the flooding and the devastation resulted from the failure of the levee. It wasn't as much from the wind and the rain from the hurricane. Yes, sir.
Is New Orleans still recovering?
Yeah. Yeah, there's still a lot being done in recovery mode. There's still a lot of people who go down there and do service projects, helping to rebuild houses. People like Harry Connick Jr., Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie, I can't remember, Sandra Bullock, and others.
Did Lil Wayne even send money to his hometown?
I can't speak for Lil Wayne. I'm not a fan. But, you know, I don't know, honestly, because, you know, maybe once he gets off drugs, he can think clearly. I don't know. I'm not, like I said, I'm not a fan. I took some pictures when I went back. This was about a couple months later. This is actually a house used to be here, and I'll show you. Says looters will be cursed. This was the elementary school. This was actually the elementary school down the street from where my parents lived. My sister went here, and water went up to where the plywood is, over the doors, and went all the way up there. And they actually have bulldozed this elementary school. And in the wake of Hurricane Katrina, they've tried to reform education in the city. So they've rebuilt this elementary school, but the people who live in this neighborhood can't attend it.
Why?
Because there are 3 different school districts in New Orleans right now, and this one was built as a charter school, and kids are actually going to be bused in from somewhere else in the city. So you can live across the street from this school, but you probably can't attend it. A lot of the homes, this is a house actually across the street from my parents' house, and again, they were able to board it up. And from the outside, it kind of looks like it's okay because you see the bricks. But I showed you the inside, what you saw in the kitchen in my parents' house. I mean, basically, there was kind of a brown sludge that formed from some oil and water and the dirt sitting there for months, well, for almost a month, you know, in some homes that, so if you go in the inside, it might be completely gutted, or you would get nauseous, you get sick. But on the outside, sometimes they just look fine. Yes, sir.
What were the people like? Where did they go?
Well, a lot of people evacuated and went to Houston. A lot of people evacuated and went to Atlanta. Some people have gone in other places. There's still a lot of people who live in Houston and Atlanta that evacuated after Katrina. Just kind of rebuilt there because, you know, after something like this, you just say you don't really want to go through it again, even though it's your home and your culture. You don't, you know, it's a devastating thing. You lose everything that you didn't have on you, on your possession at that time. A lot of the businesses, if you can see in the corner on the left, there's the tree cutting services, there was a lot of garbage collection. There were millions of dollars in federal aid that were given to kind of collect the debris and the garbage to go into the homes, because people would have to go in and pay someone or go in themselves with masks on to basically pull everything out of their homes. And you'd have to pull it out, and then somebody would be paid to come along and just collect it. And it took probably a couple of years to get that all done. And people were living in trailers. I don't know if I have a picture of the trailers. Probably not. Now this actually, these were houses. What happened was the water got shut off after the flooding, and they didn't actually get a lot of water in this area, but because the water was shut off, a fire broke out in the home where you see the 4 pillars that are there. A fire broke out, and there was no water to stop it, and no firemen to take care of it. So actually, it burned all the homes that were in that area. So they all burned to the ground. So it was just another, you know, kind of another result of Katrina. Yes, sir.
So they just started burning, like they just watched how it burned?
Well, I mean, if you think about it, the only people that were there were the people who had stayed, who were already in, you know, they were already being aided and they needed help. You had the National Guard that was brought in to help, but if there was no water that they could get to put it out, what were they going to do? Yeah. But again, this is another example. You have a lot of companies were able to. A lot of people were able to start debris collection companies because of Katrina, and again, federal aid. There were millions of dollars to be made in doing that.
Right here, Miss.
This was some stairs in that same area that led up to what used to be the house and
Miss
not there
Malvin.
anymore. This was actually
Miss Malvin.
yes. I'm sorry. Who?
Did you see the Saints stadium after
The Superdome?
Yeah.
Yes. I mean,
was it there?
well, I didn't go into it. I'd been in the Superdome before, and I've been in there since. But I know people. I had friends who were actually there during
When it was
Katrina.
happening?
Yeah, wow, they were there. When people were kind of panicked, and they had all these rumors that things were happening and babies are being raped and things like that. There were a lot of rumors that were going around. There was actually at one point the chief of police had heard a rumor that they were raping babies there, and there was all this destruction. There were some people that were looting, but there were some people who they just were trapped and they were actually trying to get food. No, it didn't actually happen. But it was just, there was a lot of, you guys you might not even remember when it happened, but there was a lot of rumor and innuendo that was going on when Katrina was taking place and the aftermath, because people didn't know what was going on, and they just kind of assumed sometimes that all the craziness that people were saying was actually happening. And because of that, there were people who weren't sure if they should go in, and they had, the National Guard, we have to make sure we come in with guns. Well, you had just people who were residents who may have been too poor to go anywhere, or they just, chose not to go anywhere, and they were stuck there. So, not everybody was there to rob or to do anything like that, but the idea at the time had been that these people were dangerous. And it actually, I didn't see a change in the attitude and the ways that people were addressing the real needs in the city until Harry Connick Jr. actually went on television, and he went to the convention center and said, nobody's trying to attack me, nobody's trying to rape me. Like, there was a woman who was in a wheelchair who just died in the front because there was nobody to help her. Her family was there. There was, nobody to give her any kind of real assistance. And he went in and said, these people need help. Nobody's trying to kill me. It's not a dangerous situation. It's a dire situation. So people started to understand that people really needed help. And I think that was became a really great opportunity for the nation to really get behind the city and to show support and to show that, we're all citizens of this country and we can help one another when necessary. But this was an automobile supply place, where you could go like an AutoZone or something like that. And initially they tried to open, but it didn't. They weren't able to function, so they closed, and I don't think they ever reopened. This is actually the church that I used to go to. You can see there was damage, of course, from the wind, but a lot of it, like I said, was from the flooding. And you can see the numbers, like the NY at the top. That was the National Guard unit that went in there, and there were no bodies found, which is why there's a 0 on the bottom, and the 9/9. That was the date that they went in. Pardon me? Yeah. So, yeah, there were some people who would report their animals that they left behind were missing or things like that. So when they went in, like this was, somebody went in on the 15th, and but they didn't find the animal there, and they mark all of those things, and it's almost it was strange to see it because it was on every house because they had to go door to door, and there were some people who, if you lived in an apartment or something, you stayed. I had relatives who stayed, and they were on a first floor apartment, and they had to break into an apartment on the second floor because the water went all the way up to the first floor, and they were rescued by boat. And ended up at the convention center, and then ended up in, I think, Utah for a while. So, it's a very big difference from Louisiana to Utah. This obviously the car was parked there, and the water, if you can see, went very far up to the top. So that, but this actually wasn't the worst damage. This house, if you see way in the back, the tan home back there, do y'all see that one?
Yeah.
You see where that blue dumpster is to the left of it?
Yeah.
That's where the house was.
What?
Because that house was actually right where the levee broke. Where it broke in one part. So it actually picked the house up and moved it to all the way over there. So, and this was a couple months after Katrina, and you had people who were coming in to try and help clean up, but they were trying to address, this was where one of the levee systems, again, had kind of broken down, and that house that's right there behind the pole had actually been pushed and moved as well. And that's just a closer shot of that house. Pardon me? Well, if you think about it, I mean, some places had, we'll talk about Isaac. Isaac was a Category 1 hurricane, but in some very low-lying areas right on the coast where it did the most damage, people who were outside of the levee system, because the country has actually spent $1.2 billion to rebuild the levee system, so it's really much better than it was when Katrina happened. But if you're outside of that system, you stand to be in the same danger that New Orleanians were before Katrina, and people have gotten 12 and 14 feet of water in their house during Isaac, who didn't have any water for Katrina. Yes, sir.
What about Charlotte?
Well, Charlotte is different in that Charlotte's not a low-lying area, but if you think about things like, you remember last year when there was the earthquake that, I don't know, I didn't feel, but some people said that they felt. You know, what if it had been more powerful and done damage? Is Charlotte prepared? It's kind of like, it kind of gave every city an idea of, you have to really look at what's the worst case scenario. 20 years ago, Hugo hit, and it actually, I mean, Charlotte's not on the coast of anything, but it passed through, and people went without electricity in Charlotte for 13 days. Can you imagine? You don't have, you know, if your house is electric, you can't cook, you can't take a hot shower, you can't wash anything for 13 days. I mean, that's reality. So it could easily happen here. Yes, sir.
My parents, we had no electricity. Our transformer went out, so our neighborhood was one of the last ones to get power again. We couldn't flush the toilet unless you put water in it. Yes.
Unless you put what in it?
All our food spoiled. We had to throw all our food away out of our freezer. You couldn't hardly get gas. It was a mess.
I remember.
You had to put what in the toilet?
You have to put water in it to make it go down.
Mhm.
The water doesn't flow into the freezer.
Over there where I was staying, like,
Soup.
electricity went out like a week,
Mm.
and it was horrible. We had to cook our eggs on the grill.
Yeah, I mean, it's not fun. It's definitely not fun. The hardest thing, one of the things that became a real problem in New Orleans is that, you know, like I said, the water was standing for so long. When people would come in to clean out, you would have a refrigerator there, and imagine it had been a month, and you had food in there that had spoiled almost a month ago. So basically, people had to kind of take the refrigerators and tape them shut and sit them outside. And there were, I mean, you could see rows of refrigerators down streets that were just kind of sitting outside waiting to be collected, because God only knows how it would smell to open them, or I'm not exactly sure what they did with them when they collected them. But so that was 7 years ago. Since then, again, they spent more than $1 billion to rebuild the levee system, and there's still, though, a lot of cleanup that's being done. And for about 2 years, there were people who lived in trailers. My parents lived in a trailer that was probably the length of your computer, rows of computers right here. And you know, you go from a 4-bedroom, 4-bedroom, 2.5 bathroom, 2-car garage home to living in a trailer that's not a double wide or anything. And
That's not good.
but you know, my mom called her Katrina the great equalizer, because you know, it wasn't, people would talk about poor people being disenfranchised, but it wasn't just poor people. It was doctors, lawyers, ministers, you know, whoever, everybody. There were a lot of people who lost everything in the storm. Yes, sir.
Everybody thought that was gonna be the end of the world.
What do you mean?
Now, Katrina came, they thought it was gonna be the end of the world.
Well, I think a lot of people, myself included, we weren't sure if the city of New Orleans would ever come back. And you know, there are a lot of people who said that they would never come back to the city, and I know people who said that who have since come back, because it's a very unique place. It's, you know, Charlotte, you know, you might love Charlotte. There might be things you like about Charlotte that make you want to stay here forever. there's a lot of things about New Orleans that people like, and a lot of, if your family goes back generations and generations, that's what you know, and that's where you're more comfortable. And there are a lot of people who try to move away, but they just feel like the culture is what they want, so they've moved back. So, any questions about anything? Nothing? Yes, sir?
Did you talk to your family during the storm?
Actually, I had a New Orleans cell phone, and one of the things that happened was the cell towers, of course, were down. So people couldn't call me either. I was in Florida at the time, but people couldn't reach me, but we could text. And basically, that was the only way to communicate. But when you're without power and you're there, your phone's only going to last so long. So you could text and you could try and find somewhere to charge it, maybe in your car, but, that was the only means of communication. Yes.
Was you panicking?
I mean, you can't really panic because there was nothing that you can do. I was upset. I wanted to help. I wanted to try and go down there and help, but there was no way, because if you can imagine, along the coast of the country, from, say, west of New Orleans all the way down through Mississippi and Alabama into parts of Florida, was completely damaged. It was completely knocked out. It wasn't navigable. You couldn't drive through. So I would have had to try to, fly in, but the airport was closed. So people couldn't get in to help. And if you lived in that area, you really couldn't get out if you hadn't already.
Airport should have been places where people could go.
Well, airports became triages for people who were ill. They were, set up so people, were sitting in there with IVs and, being treated by doctors.
So as Ms. Malvo was talking, she said that several types of businesses started because of the storm. What were some of those businesses?
Bulb removal?
Speak loudly, please. Okay.
Debris collection.
Okay. Okay.
Structural damage repairman?
Okay. So all of these are types of businesses, and as we get ready to go more into our unit on why people are motivated to start businesses, what are types of businesses, for-profit, non-profit. Some of the businesses she spoke about were for-profit, and some of them were non-profit. Does anybody know some of the non-profit businesses that she mentioned came in? Yes. Okay, she did talk about AutoZone, but AutoZone is a for-profit business, but it was closed. Some of the businesses that came in to help.
Coast Guard?
Say it loud.
Coast Guard?
What did James say?
Coast Guard. Coast Guard.
Okay, what else? Yep, what else? What else?
Red Cross?
Okay, in the back, what else? Okay, so as we start to go more into this unit, this is starting our conversation and some things that we're going to be able to do. Are there any more questions specifically about Katrina?